Gendoblet. Yay! Yay! I learned how to pronounce Polish in hello. I'm super excited to be here with a room full of driven people who are here to network and learn and advance ourselves. So we are all professionals who have a lot of stuff to do. When you need to get something important done, like a proposal, a design project, where do you usually go? The founder of Basecamp, Jason Fried, has been asking people this question for many years. So the answers he gets range from an extra bedroom in a house, people go to the library, they go to a cafe, they work early in the mornings or late in the evenings when no one else is around. But most of people usually work in a place, but that hasn't come up as an answer, and that is the office. Why don't people go to the office to get something done? Because working in the office usually look like this. I made this comic to illustrate a day in the office where I used to work. So you could be in the middle of a complicated UX project, or you could be looking at a lot of complicated user research insights. And your colleague come to your desk and interrupt you with something not very important, or you got interrupted by the chatter in the background, and you lose your focus, and it's really hard to come back. So that was the day in the office as well. According to research, people are less productive, 66% less productive when they're working in an open plan office, which is what the majority of tech companies do nowadays. So if open plan office is not productive, is there an alternative? Is there a solution? In my opinion, that's remote work. I've been working remotely for actually 7 years now as an independent designer, and as well, I'm a freelancer on a talent network called TopTal. And as Justina mentioned, I'm one of the co-organizers at Ladies at UX, and I founded the Amsterdam chapter, which now we have more than 2,000 members in a community. So I spend all of my days working remotely, and most of the time it's at home, and sometimes when I'm traveling, like right now I'm in Krakow, so I work remotely. And you're probably thinking, I'm a UX designer, and I spend most of my days working behind my desk. Well, how do you talk to stakeholders? How do you talk to users? How do you talk to the team? How do you prove the value of UX? How do you do workshops? You have a lot of questions for somebody who might be working remotely full-time. But I want to answer the question starting by, even if somebody who works at the office, it does not mean they are doing all these things on a day-to-day basis. Remote comes with each of our own challenges, but working in the office is not the answer to doing all of the things more effectively. So I'd like to tell you a bit more about my process for UX design and also user research. So my process for UX design is pretty typical. Start by communicating with stakeholders. You understand what is the problem, what you're going to do, and you plan a task with the scope, you plan the user story, you plan who's going to do what, and then you get into the design phase, iteration phase to get feedback, and then when it's done, you sign off the design, you deliver it. For the first step, communicate. In a typical face-to-face setting, you have a meeting. A bunch of people are going to gather around a room, and they are going to talk about the thing that they are trying to do. In a remote context, you do the same, except the meeting happens online. So majority of us have probably tried video conferencing sometime in our work life. And I know there's a lot of challenges. Like, can you hear me? Oh, your video is lagging. People are talking over each other. I have been through all of that. So with 7 years of remote working, video conferencing becomes a really normal part of my day job. So I want to give you some tips. So first, as a remote worker, good internet and headphones are must. They're as important as having a good computer. As a remote worker, it becomes your responsibility to make sure you always have stable internet and offer good audio quality to your colleagues. And after trying so many different video conferencing tools, I've come to have three favorite that I recommend. That is Zoom, GoToMeeting, and Appearing. So for Zoom and GoToMeeting, you can actually record a meeting. So you can have this save recording for any colleague who are not able to join a meeting. And it's really good for documentation of what was said in case some stakeholder forgot what she have decided. And you can always refer back to the recorded meeting. So now you have a meeting, you discuss what you're going to do, and now you need to plan a user story. In a typical face-to-face context, you have another meeting where you're going to talk about the user story and who's going to build it. And as a remote worker, sometimes we need a meeting, but sometimes we don't, because the expectation for a remote worker is that we work pretty autonomously. So therefore, we use project management tools such as Jira and Asana, and we just plan the task in these tools. Now, the design phase. Whether you work in office or remotely, we cannot design without tools like Sketch, Adobe XD, Figma, and so on. However, for a remote designer, she is able to use collaboration tools such as real-time board, where you can collaborate simultaneously in real time. You can work on a variety of different projects. And in fact, real-time board is one of my favorite tools when it comes to collaboration and also designing flows and so on. So after the design is done, you now need the feedback and iteration. And again, the designer in a typical workplace, they are going to go to a place and they are going to have a meeting, and one person is going to show his or her design to the whole group to try to gather feedback. A remote designer, we could use tools such as InVision Freehand or just InVision, where people can comment, annotate, and even draw the feedback. And the thing cool about the comment or the annotation feature is that people can do this at their own time. They are not forced to set up a time, block out an hour in their calendar. They can just comment, they can just annotate and give feedback whenever they are free. So after the design is done, you now need to deliver the designs. Again, to deliver the designs, you now need to have a meeting, and people are going to review the designs, and people are going to discuss, is this thing done now, who is going to build it? In a remote context, as people work independently, sometimes we don't need to have meetings. We just change the status of such tasks to done. So that was my process for UX design, and now I'd like to show you my process for user research. Before I go on, I want to make it clear that there are some methods for user research that are not suitable or even possible with remotes, like ethnography study or contextual inquiry. When you need to be there in person for the user, you cannot do it remotely. However, for the most common type of user research, such as usability tests, user interviews, focus groups, and so on, it is possible with remote work. As well, running it remotely means that it's going to be cheaper and faster. So my user research process is also pretty standard. It starts from recruiting the users to scheduling the users and actually running the test or the interviews, synthesizing the insights, and then reporting to the stakeholders. For the first part, recruiting the users, for easier comparison, let's just say the company who are old-fashioned and they don't want to use any digital tools or any online tools. How would they recruit the users? They would probably go on the street, try to ask people to fill out some survey. Maybe they could call some organizations. Maybe they could set up a booth in the store to try to gather some survey or user test participants. Imagine if today the requirement is that you need to find 100 people. How long would that take using the traditional methods? Now compare that to remote work. For 100 users, I was able to do that just in one night because I used online methods such as forums, online networks such as Facebook group, LinkedIn groups, Craigslist, and also my personal networks. When I was looking for users to participate in user research for Japan and Taiwan, I actually was able to gather users, more than 100 users in just one night. So now after you find the users, you now need to schedule the user research sessions. So again, let's just say they don't want to use any online or digital tools. How would they schedule all these users? They're probably going to have a pile of notebooks or maybe a wall of stickies or flip charts. Compare that with remote, where you can use tools such as Google Spreadsheets or even better, Airtable, that you can organize all of these insights, all of these user profiles, and all of the time, all of the schedule, and you can share with your whole team. You can collaborate with multiple researchers, and everyone is very clear who we are going to interview and the content of the user research, comparing to a pile of notebooks, which you cannot pass around very easily. Now you need to do the interview or the usability test. In a traditional context, you could invite them to a usability lab. You could invite them to your office or invite them to wherever place you choose to do the research. But the downside of that, it's very time-consuming and it's very costly. There are more and more remote research tools that you can use out there that you can talk to users over the internet, ask them to try out your product, invite them to tell you about their needs, frustrations, pains, and goals. So this is a tool called Ping Pong, and they actually help you schedule the users, find the users, and do the test, everything in one. Now, after you do the research, you now need to synthesize the insights. Isn't this the most fun part of user research? So you need to synthesize the insights, and what do people usually do? They are going to gather around the room, and they are going to have a wall of printouts and stickies, and they are going to gather around to discuss. They're going to try to arrange some stickies and try to find some patterns and insights. In a remote context, you can do the same, but except you use tools such as real-time board, where you can actually easily organize all of these stickies in a very easy and very quick way. Or you can use Airtable to actually organize all the insights so that later they become searchable and you have documentations, comparing to the traditional method that you're going to have a wall and later you are still going to have to document it, because how are people going to understand from a wall of stickies what is the insight of a user research? So now you did all that, and now it's time to present your great insights to the stakeholders. In a face-to-face setting, how do you do that? You have a meeting again. You're going to meet with the stakeholders, and you're going to walk through the findings of your research. In remote, you also do the same, except we don't need a room. We just gather online, and one person shares his or her screen and walk through the user research. Did you notice how many meetings were in the face-to-face setting? I did. So after 7 years of remote work, I now took away 5 important lessons. So first, when I work remotely, I am much, much more productive. This is my day when I work in the office. My day starts at 9, it ends at 5. And I wake up at 8 a.m. to prepare for my work day. At 8:30, I bike to work because I live in Amsterdam. At 9, I start my day, and until 10:30, I have a stand-up meeting. So I have a stand-up meeting that ends at 11. I have an hour of productive time until I have to go to lunch at 12. I have to go to lunch at 12 because every team has a designated time that they have to go to the cafeteria, because the office is very big. So if everybody goes at 12 or 12:30 or 1, then the cafeteria becomes a huge chaos. So even though whether I'm hungry or not, I have to go to the cafeteria at 12. And you're going to line up for the food, and you're going to have lunch with your colleague, and you're going to have a pleasant lunch break. And then the lunch break ends at 1. Now you need to go back to your desk and work on your project again. Until 2 p.m. and your colleague is like, who wants to go to get a Frappuccino at Starbucks? And of course, you don't want to be the loner, so you're going to say, hey, I'll join you. And then you go to Starbucks, you get your Frappuccino, and then when you come back, it's already 2:30. You look at your calendar and you realize, hey, you have a meeting at 3 o'clock. What do you do in these 30 minutes? Not very much time to do any productive work. So you end up chatting with some colleagues, maybe reply some emails. And if you have a relaxed area in the office, you're probably going to lie on a beanbag or read some books. And then you go to the meeting at 3, and it's going to end at 4, and sometimes you might go over time and end at 4:30. So now at 4 or 4:30, you now try to get back to your project, try to iterate some more. And 5 p.m. is a happy hour time where people are trying to get the beer or the wine from the fridge, and they're going to have some happy hour. Because what is an office without happy hour and fun times, right? So then that ends your day. Now compare that with my remote work day, where I wake up at 7:30, actually just slightly earlier when I used to wake up when I work in office. I wake up at 7:30 because I want to work on my side project. I use this time to write a new talk, write an article. I also do mentorship meetings with people based in Asia. And then at 9, I turn on my work hat and I go turn on my Slack status and I go to client work. So at 9 till 11, I have a productive hour, 2 productive hours, and at 11 is when I have the stand-up meeting. And after the stand-up meeting, I have more time to do productive work again, and I can have my lunch break whenever I want because I work from home. And because I work from home, I can cook a healthy lunch, and most of the time I actually just microwave leftovers. So my lunch break is actually really short, and then I can actually have lunch breaks whenever I want. Then my afternoons become long productive hours because my client's major time zone is in New York. So it means that they only wake up around 3 or 4 p.m. my time. So between 12:30 to 3, I have a long period for productive work. So I have a meeting with my client based in New York at 3 o'clock, and that ends at 4. And at 4, I go back to my client work again. I try to iterate on my project until 5 o'clock is when I switch to side project mode again. So at 5 p.m., I use this time to do my volunteer work for ladies at UX. Also, I have mentorship meetings with people that's based in the US. Use this time to iterate on an article, a talk, and so on. So now when you compare my productive hours, in office, I have 5 hours. In remote contact, I have 6 hours. Not to mention, I get an extra 3.5 hours to work on my side projects. And you can use this time to do whatever you want to accelerate your career. So my productivity comparing at an office and also remote work is that when I work in the office, I have maximum 1 side project, because when I work in office and talking to people face-to-face for 8 hours a day, it's, for me, pretty exhausting. And when I get home, I don't have energy to do any side project. And at most, I have 1. But when I do remote work, I can take on 2 or 3 clients at a time. I can do mentoring, I can do speaking, I can do writing, and I can do volunteering. So that is because I have control of what I want to spend my time and when I want to spend it. So besides higher productivity, the second lesson I have is about remote communication. So remote communication is hard. It's hard when you cannot see any body language. You cannot even see the person you're talking to, and you have to rely all this communication through reading or even through listening to the person. So my takeaway for communication is that you should try to over-communicate as much as you can. If somebody said about a project, and you read it and you agree with it, don't just do nothing. Maybe give a thumbs up. Maybe comment on it like, yeah, that's a great idea. We will try to implement this in the next sprint. So try to over-communicate as well, especially in text communication, like if you use email or Slack, HipChat. Try to assume the best intentions, even if when you read it, it might not sound very pleasant. But if there's a miscommunication, try to just call the person to make sure, like, hey, I noticed that you said this. Can I just try to understand this is what you meant and try to be aligned on the same page? But above all, assume that the person has best intentions because we're working for the same client or same company and we all want the company to succeed. And next, when you communicate remotely, public channel is better than a private channel. It might feel more comfortable to us to talk in a direct message, to talk about a project. But what's the concern of the issue is that only 2 people are now aware of a situation. And when you need to loop into other people, you now need to repeat the whole thing to other team members. And people are not sure what's going on because only you 2 have been involved in this direct communication. So when you need to discuss something and try to do that in a more public channel, so when you need to loop in other people, it's very easy, and people can just read back on the chat history to know what has been decided. And as well, if you find that you're talking with a colleague and you're having back and forth messages, and it's now becoming a lot of messages you have to exchange, just try to call each other. It's oftentimes when you need to have more than 3 back and forth messages, it's just much easier to use a call instead. And all of this remote communication, if these tips are useful to you, I will recommend 2 resources. One is GitLab's Communication Handbook. The other one is a remote handbook by Hanno. So GitLab is like, if I understand correctly, is GitHub, but open source, and then Hanno is a remote-only UX product agency. And they are really remote companies. And in the guidebook, you can find so many things about how to schedule meetings and with your communication and writing guidelines. So I really recommend any teams who like to adapt remote work or improve their remote skills, try to check out these 2 handbooks. My 3rd lesson is about routine and boundaries. So as a remote worker, you're responsible to set your own boundary because if you work, especially if you work across multiple time zones, when you're off work, the work is still actually going on in Slack and email, project management tool, or whatever. So you should try to set your own work schedule. For me, I choose 9 to 5, not because like it's the standard work hour, but because that works for me to adapt to my side project schedule, and also it works for my team. You can have it 10 to 6, you can have it 11 to 7, whatever that works for your time zone and your team. However, when you're off work, turn your notifications off, close your laptop, go offline to make sure that you do not take work into your personal life. And as a remote worker, it's really important to minimize your distractions because at home or at a cafe, you can have so many other things going on. So therefore, try to work in an environment that suits you best. If you need a quiet environment, like I do, work from home. If you need to play music to be very productive, then work in an environment that allows you to play music out loud. And as well, your Slack status should reflect your actual work status. If you're on vacation, set it on vacation. If you're busy, put it busy to tell others that you're busy, so don't bother you. Or that if you're out for a lunch break, you'll be back in an hour. Put that in your status to really try to communicate, because it's easier to know to set expectations that you're going to be back in 30 minutes, rather than thinking that the person just not replying me, the person is ignoring me. So setting the status can be very beneficial for your remote team. So this is how I set up my Slack statuses. Who here uses Slack? Hope I'm not the only one. Okay, actually 70% of the people. So here I set up my do not disturb here. So from 6 to 9, which is actually outside my work hours, I have do not disturb on. So they cannot send me anything on Slack. They can, I just will not read it. And as well, I like to use this nothing setting because I have this information anxiety. If I see this badge, I will always want to click it. So I know myself, I just set it to nothing. So I will see a little smaller white dot so I can check it whenever I want instead of Slack trying to nudge me, hey, you have this notification when you are off. As well, this is the reflecting the status I was talking about. If you're busy, set it to busy. When you're out of office, you set it to out of office. And I also talk about minimize distractions. I used to have a difficult time to maintain my self-discipline in order to have long working hours at home. So what I did is I started using this app called Self-Control to have some self-control. What it does is that it blocks any app that you can choose. You can block YouTube, you can block Facebook, you can block whatever you want. So you can set it to like 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, and I noticed that even if you just set it for 30 minutes, the fact that when you go to YouTube and it blocks it kind of is a good reminder for you to get back to work. So you tried it for 2 times, Twitter, doesn't work. And you're like, okay, I guess I have to get back to work. Even after 30 minutes, it helps you get into this productive flow. So I highly recommend it. My 4th lesson is about time zones. So now I actually have to work with people in New York, in London, in Hong Kong, in Sydney. So time zone, it's a big challenge. What you could do here when you work across time zone is to communicate when in the other people's time zone is when you'll be working. For example, should I be expecting you online at 5 p.m. their time, 11 a.m. their time? Tell them your work schedule in their time zone. So it's really good communication, and they will not be expecting you in a time that you're off. As well, if you work across time zone, try to adapt asynchronous communication. For example, we're very used to sending a message and people reply instantly. But in a remote context, give people room, give people time to think about it and reply to you, because maybe they're not even online, maybe they're busy with other things. As well, if someone has to compromise, try to take turns. Because if you work with time zones like Pacific time, Eastern time, European time, Asia time, and then Australia time, for somebody, the meeting is at 3 a.m. or 11 p.m. or at really odd hours. If you need to meet for all these people, it's kind of tough for one person to keep taking on the 4 a.m. meeting. So try to take turns and make sure that in every meeting there's a new person who's having this challenging time zone. Or you could just record it and have the person catch up later. I use these 2 tools to manage time zones. So Time.is is one tool that allows a comprehensive table that you can know, okay, so this time is not good for London, and you can try to find a best time, which for London and Taipei is London's 9 a.m., Taipei's 4 p.m. And every time zone gives you an overview of all of the time zones across the world, and you can try to find the most sensible time if you need to meet across really faraway time zones. And the last lesson I have about remote work is about the internet speed. As a remote worker, your life really depends on the internet. And since this is so important, you can read reviews or ask ahead about your internet speed if you will be traveling. For example, you can even find reviews on hotels page where people can comment about the internet speed. If you're going to stay in the Airbnb, you can even direct message your host and to ask him or her to do a speed test. And you can also use app or sites to find suitable places to work. So I use a few of them. I use WorkFrom, I use Work Hard Anywhere. So one is a website, one is a mobile app that have details about internet speed, outlet availability, and even password itself. So when I need to travel and work remotely, I use these tools. And finally, I always like to wrap up with something very practical. So here is a list of all of the tools I have mentioned in the talk where you can just take a picture and you can later Google them. And I hope this is useful for you. Thank you.